I knew it from the moment our eyes met that night. This was trouble with a capital T. There was that instant zing, like in the movies, but you never think it'll happen to you. He had a smile that could charm a snake. I didn't even like that about him, to be honest. But there I was, a week later, sitting across a way too expensive lunch table, pretending the butterflies in my stomach were just nerves. "So tell me about yourself, Sarah," he said. And stupid me, I did. It all came spilling out. My boring routine. My husband who'd stopped seeing me as a woman a long time ago, and how my kids were growing up so fast. Pathetic, really. It was like all that misery I'd been keeping bottled up inside had finally found a cork to pop. Thomas, the perfect listener. He just nodded, that slow, understanding way that made me feel like, for the first time in years, someone actually cared. That's the thing about these guys, they prey on vulnerability. They see a crack and they just know how to wedge themselves in. He played on it like a cheap violin, telling me his own sob story about some dead-end, loveless marriage. Turns out, we were both miserable. Funny how that makes you feel so much less alone. Funny how quick something can turn, isn't it? One minute you're a sensible, married woman having a little harmless lunch, and the next, you're sending flirty texts from the bathroom, sweating like a teenager. It was like something had snapped in me. "Can't stop thinking about you," I wrote, my thumb hovering over send. Hitting that button changed everything. The second that text vanished into the ether, I knew I wasn't just flirting anymore. This felt reckless, dangerous, it felt damn good. A week later, we weren't lunching anymore. Some cheap motel room, the smell of stale cigarettes, and the way his voice got thick when he whispered my name, it was intoxicating. I should have felt disgusted, but I couldn't. All I could think was, finally, I'm alive again. Afterwards, the guilt hit me hard. The drive home felt like 1,000 miles, my stomach twisting into knots. But, when I saw my husband slumped on the couch, his face illuminated by the flicker of the TV, that pang of guilt. It vanished along with his outline. That night, as I lay beside him, the lie felt heavy on my chest, but beneath it, a flicker of excitement wouldn't die. Thomas was wrong, so wrong for me, but somehow, that just made him more irresistible. Things blurred together after that. The thrill of sneaking around was one hell of a drug, and boy, was I hooked. My whole life became a stupid balancing act one was bound to fail. Late meeting. I'd lie to my husband, then rush to some cheap hotel room where Thomas would be waiting in his wrinkled suit, that same cheesy grin on his face. Every second with him was tainted with guilt, but then he'd touch my skin and, poof, all that responsible wife stuff vanished like smoke. Back home. I'd bury myself in domestic routine, scrubbing imaginary stains from the kids' clothes, anything to fight off the image of Thomas's hands on my body. I'd overhear my husband talking to the kids on the phone, his voice full of love for them, and the guilt would choke me all over again. It was exhausting but way too thrilling to stop. The lies got easier, more elaborate. It was like I'd become a pro at inventing fake work trips, sudden family emergencies, you name it. My best friend, bless her clueless heart, kept marveling at how busy I'd become. If only she knew. Sometimes, I'd catch my own reflection. Eyes bright with lies, the flush on my cheeks not just from exertion, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Thomas started pushing for more. Weekends away, fancy dinners I could never explain. I knew it was crazy, but I also kind of liked the risk, the feeling of dancing on the edge of disaster. He started talking about leaving his wife too. "We could be together for real, Sarah," he'd whisper, holding me close. It was a fantasy, of course, but it gave me a reason to spend those stolen hours together without losing my mind. Then came the jewelry. First, a necklace, delicate and beautiful. Way too much for a fling. He saw the doubt in my eyes. "Think of it as spoiling yourself. You deserve it," he said, all smooth and insistent. And the stupid thing is, he was right. I did deserve a break from my endless chores and the hamster wheel of motherhood. So, I took it, and the earrings, and those wild nights in hotel suites, where I could pretend I was anyone but plain old, boring Sarah. He played me like a fiddle, I see that now. The gifts, the whispers, they were traps, a gilded leash. I was too busy feeling special to realize he was just tightening his grip. Every necklace, every getaway, made it harder to picture a life without him. It was pathetic, really. Here I was, a grown woman, letting myself be bought one shiny trinket at a time. My whole body turned into a giant knot of anxiety. It tightened a little more each day. A knot in my stomach when I heard the doorbell ring, a knot in my throat when I saw a strange number flash on my phone. Turns out, you can't live 100 different lives without some serious side effects. Thomas had this way of making me feel like the only woman in the world, but I wasn't an idiot. I knew the sweet talk could switch on a dime. One minute he'd be all, "You're my everything, Sarah," and the next, his phone would buzz and he'd be off meeting a client. I'd pretend it didn't bother me, but of course, it gnawed at me like a rat. Turns out, I was right to be paranoid. One late night at some out-of-the-way bar he liked, there she was, some blonde thing, half my age, practically draped across his lap. I just froze. The roar in my ears drowned out whatever he was saying. I wanted to scream, make a scene, but all I could do was watch my little fantasy world crumble. Instead of walking out, I cried in the bathroom for what felt like hours. Then, I walked right back to the table, sat myself down, and smiled. Like a good little wifey, just waiting for her husband to finish his business meeting. I think a part of me wanted to see just how far he'd take it. When he finally looked my way, that smirk vanished real fast. He knew. The fight started after that. Me. Yelling in the car on the way back to our hotel, tears smudging my makeup. Him, angry and cold. "You're being crazy," he'd hiss. I knew I was, but I couldn't stop. My whole life felt like a powder keg ready to blow. Back home, I couldn't even look my husband in the eye. The way he trusted me, the way he still kissed me goodnight, it made my skin crawl. I'd snap at the kids, then sob when they were out of earshot. Sleep started to feel like some kind of twisted joke. If it wasn't guilt keeping me up, it was nightmares, me getting caught, my husband's face twisted with betrayal, the kids walking away from me forever. Even when I did sleep, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding like a drum. One morning, I looked in the mirror and almost screamed. Haggard eyes, pale skin, I looked like a decade had been stolen from me in just a few months. Finally, I dragged myself to the doctor. Mumbling something about stress and exhaustion, expecting some sleep pills. What I got was a long, serious look and a referral to a therapist. Turns out, you can't lie your way out of a panic attack. That therapist had a way of peering right into your soul. It was infuriating. Week after week, I dodged her questions, spin half-lies, trying to make myself look like some victim of circumstance instead of the architect of my own misery. But she wasn't buying it, not for a second. One day, she hit me with it. "Sarah, this isn't about stress or exhaustion. This is about a lie you're living." It felt like a punch in the gut. I knew she was right, but admitting it out loud? That felt like stepping off a cliff. That night, everything cracked open. My husband was watching some mindless TV show, and I just couldn't take another second of his oblivious trust. "I need to talk to you," I blurted out. His eyes met mine, and for a second I saw a flicker of fear in them. The words spilled out like poison, not everything, of course, not the sordid details, but enough. His face turned ashen, he didn't yell, didn't throw things. Worse, he just sat so still, like he turned to stone right in front of me. "Is he? Is it someone I know?" he managed to ask. The pathetic hope in his voice broke what was left of me. I should have just said yes, made it easy, but I just shook my head. The silence was deafening. Finally, he stood, towering over me now. "I need time," he choked out. "I need to think." Later, lying in our big empty bed, I felt a sick sense of relief. The secret was out, hanging between us. I could almost breathe again. Almost. Next morning, back to purgatory, stiff smiles, forced conversation over breakfast with the kids, him packing an overnight bag with that same stone-cold expression. It was all so agonizingly polite. As he walked out the door, he turned back one last time. "You choose, Sarah," he said, "him or me, but know this, if you choose him, don't expect to come back." The door slammed shut, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the weight of this impossible choice. My marriage, the life I'd built, crumbling around me, and for whom? For a man who might already be with some other woman, laughing at my misery. Every cell in my body screamed at me to pack a bag, to run to Thomas and beg for forgiveness. But another, quieter voice whispered, "What happens when the thrill fades again? When another blonde hangs off his arm. I wanted to smash something, to tear the whole damn house down until there was nothing but rubble. But all I could do was sink to the floor and sob until I couldn't cry anymore. My phone jangled me awake. It was barely dawn, and that could only mean one thing: trouble. My heart sank before I even picked up. "Sarah, it's Kate." My best friend's voice was strained, a whisper laced with fear. "It's Thomas, there's been an accident." The next few hours were a blur of shock and frantic activity. Dressing in a daze, racing to the hospital, the sterile walls and the smell of antiseptic bringing back a wave of nausea. And there was his wife. I knew her, of course. Not personally, but from a distance. The photos Thomas showed me once, where he'd carefully cropped her out, the beautiful wife, the two smiling kids. Perfect family he'd never leave. Lies, all lies. Now here she was, pale and shattered, looking 20 years older overnight. A small part of me felt some twisted satisfaction, but mostly, I felt shame wash over me like acid. I was the other woman. The homewrecker. I lurked by the waiting room, too cowardly to face her. Instead, news came from a grim-faced doctor. "Severe injuries," he said. "He's lucky to be alive." Alive, but maybe not the same Thomas. Maybe not the man I'd lost my damn mind over. The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. It was Kate who finally dragged me out of there. "You need to see this," she said, shoving a crumpled tabloid into my hands. The headline screamed, "Local businessman's double life exposed." There was my Thomas, blurry photo taken from behind some bushes, leaving our usual motel the morning before. And right beside the trashy gossip were those family photos of his I thought I knew so well. It all came crashing down. His wife at the hospital, the photos, those kids who'd probably never look at their dad the same way again. This was my fault. The guilt wasn't a knot anymore, it was a living thing inside me, clawing its way out. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I made Kate drive me to his place. Maybe I needed some twisted closure. His apartment was exactly as I imagined, soulless, generic, with a half-packed suitcase by the door. Was he running away? Maybe with one of the many other women he'd probably strung along. Then, I saw it on his desk, a framed picture I recognized. Me, my face smiling out under his lying eyes. A wave of disgust washed over me, and finally, the illusion broke. There was nothing left to hold on to. No love story, just a trail of destruction, and a whole lot of people hurt because of my stupid, selfish choices. Going home was like walking into a tomb. The kids' voices echoed in the empty rooms, their drawings still hanging on the fridge. That perfect little life was no more, destroyed by my own hands. My husband was staying with his parents. When he'd come back, it wouldn't be to reconcile, but to pack up whatever was left of his life here. I hadn't even been able to look him in the eye when I saw him briefly at the hospital. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, grim meetings, and endless paperwork. The only thing my husband and I seemed to agree on was making it quick and quiet. We both knew there was no fixing this, no going back. At least the money wasn't an issue. He took more than his fair share, but I didn't fight it. It felt like dirty money anyway. My parents were surprisingly supportive, heartbroken, angry, but there for me. It was with them I weathered the storm that followed. Whispers in the grocery store, averted eyes at the school pickup. Kate stood by me, fierce as a lioness, but even she couldn't shield me from judgment. The town I'd grown up in was suddenly a hostile place, each street corner a reminder of my spectacular fall from grace. The hardest part, though, was the kids. Their initial confusion turned to anger, and then to something worse, distance. My bubbly, chatty daughter became sullen, barely speaking to me. My son, usually so affectionate, kept his gaze fixed on anything but me. It felt like 1,000 tiny knives every time they brushed me off. It didn't matter that the lawyers had done their thing. I'd lost custody in the place that hurt most, their hearts. Waves of nausea would hit me at random moments. The doctor prescribed anti-anxiety pills, but the only thing that numbed the pain was the cheap boxed wine I started hiding around the house. Nights were a waking hell of self-recrimination. The what-ifs haunted me. What if I had just been happy with my life? What if I hadn't answered his smile that first night? Every stupid, small choice leading to this wreckage. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. My job. Long gone. Caring about my appearance? Couldn't muster the energy. My once busy social life was a wasteland. Kate tried to drag me out sometimes, but it was futile. I didn't feel like the same Sarah anymore. That woman had been impulsive, maybe a bit naive, but there was a spark in her. Now, there was just a void where my soul used to be. The numbness eventually cracked, and what poured out wasn't sadness anymore, it was rage. Rage at Thomas for lying, rage at myself for being so blind, but mostly, rage at the stupid, unfair way the world worked. Why was I the one suffering? Why did he get off seemingly scot-free, probably already on to the next woman to ruin? It gnawed at me like a rat. Sometimes I'd imagine confronting him, a grand showdown, screaming in his face. But then I'd remember those awful pictures of his wife and kids in the paper. They didn't deserve this. So, I took my fury out on the only target available, myself. I'd stare in the mirror, hating the woman reflected there. Weak. Pathetic. I barely recognized her anymore. One particularly bad day, after another bottle of that god-awful wine, I found a pair of scissors. My hair, long and blonde, just like the woman in Thomas's photos, lay scattered on the bathroom floor in a drunken mess. It looked ridiculous, of course, but I figured my whole life was ridiculous now anyway. Just another layer of ugliness I had to live with. The few friends who still stuck around tried. Coffee dates. Gentle suggestions of therapy. I'd just nod and smile vaguely, knowing I wasn't going to do any of it. Therapy implied fixing things, and nothing about my life was fixable. Instead, I spent my days holed up inside, blinds drawn, chain smoking and binging terrible reality TV. It was a perfect echo of how I felt inside, trashy and desperate. Sleep became my nemesis. When it did come, it brought only torment. Thomas's face, twisted with lust, then with surprise when I caught him. The disappointed eyes of my children. I'd jerk awake, sweating and gasping, convinced I was drowning. Some mornings, I just stayed in bed, burying myself under the duvet. Maybe if I stayed there long enough, I'd simply disappear. I thought about moving, getting a fresh start somewhere people didn't know my name. But what was the point? I couldn't outrun myself. No matter where I went, the shame would follow, clinging to me like a bad smell. This was my punishment, my scarlet letter. Maybe after a few years, people would forget. Or maybe not. Maybe this was how my story would be told from now on. The cautionary tale of Sarah, the woman who threw her life away for a cheap fling. And the worst part was, they wouldn't be wrong. Time passed with a strange, murky quality. Years slipped by, but nothing felt real anymore. Just an endless haze of muted colors and muffled sounds. I became a ghost haunting my own life, watching it pass me by from behind tired, distant eyes. Then, one afternoon, fate decided to give me a final, cruel kick in the teeth. Grocery store, of all places. I should have known better, should have stuck to ordering stuff online, but some primal part of me craved the illusion of normalcy. And there he was, Thomas, looking slightly thicker around the waist, maybe some gray creeping into his hair, but unmistakable. My heart leapt into my throat, then sank like a stone. Next to him, a radiant, heavily pregnant woman, younger than me, clinging to his arm with sickening adoration. A wave of nausea washed over me, so it hadn't been a lie after all, he'd actually left his family for some new target, just like I always feared. For a moment, I froze, the flimsy plastic basket dangling from my numb fingers. Was this my chance for some twisted kind of revenge? A scathing public confrontation, maybe? But what would it achieve? I was pathetic enough already. Instead, a strange, hollow calm came over me. He didn't see me at first, too busy cooing over some organic baby food. I almost walked away, almost saved myself from whatever fresh hell this might bring, but a perverse curiosity took hold. What? Thomas? I said, forcing a lightness into my voice. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it was replaced by a carefully blank smile. Sorry, he said, do I know you? He did it so smoothly, so convincingly, that for a split second I doubted myself. The pregnant woman looked at me, a mix of confusion and suspicion in her eyes. No, babe, she chirped, resting a hand on her swollen belly, you don't know her. Fire surged through me then, not loud and dramatic, but that slow-burning, bone-deep kind. It took everything in me not to lunge across the aisle, to slap that smug smirk off his face. Instead, I managed a sickly smile. Must be mistaken, I mumbled, then turned and practically ran from the store. I couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes, didn't want to be some deranged ex-lover harassing a happy couple. That's all I was to him now, a crazy woman with delusions. It hit me harder than anything had before. This was closure, the final nail in the coffin of my pathetic delusion. He didn't care. He barely even remembered my name. I was a mistake, a blip in his endless parade of conquests. Back home, the comforting numbness was gone. In its place was a simmering rage. My hands found the bottle I'd sworn I wouldn't touch again, my resolve crumbling with a pathetic little shrug. The next few days are a blur. Drinking around the clock, barely eating, and ignoring the frantic calls from my parents. The accident, when it happened, felt almost inevitable. It was late, I was stumbling home from the liquor store, weaving across a dark street. Lights flashed, a screech of tires, then a bone-jarring impact. I vaguely remember thinking how stupid this was, how it was all my fault. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of relief that it was finally ending. They say when you die, your whole life flashes before your eyes. Turns out, it's mostly just a flash of blinding pain, then blackness. I woke up in a hospital bed days later, bruised, battered, but surprisingly alive. A nurse, tight-lipped and efficient, informed me of the facts. I was lucky, it could have been much worse. The police came to ask questions. Mumbled answers. Vague memories of the car, the blinding headlights, nothing they could really use. Just another drunk in a small town, a statistic, not worthy of their time. Once I was released, it was like I never existed at all. No tearful bedside reunions with my kids, no concerned flock of friends. Even the usual gossips at the grocery store averted their eyes. My death would have made a tidier story, a more satisfying ending for everyone involved. My parents, bless their hearts, took me back in. Their faces were lined with worry, but there was a hardness in their eyes, a new guardedness I'd never seen before. It hurt more than any of the physical pain. I was a disappointment even in death, it seemed. My kids didn't visit. Called once to make sure I was alive, stilted and awkward, then hung up as quickly as possible. News of my little accident never even made the local gossip rags. Maybe the police paid them off, maybe it was just that boring. Instead, bits and pieces of the stories circulated by word of mouth. Whispers of troubled woman, lost everything, drank herself into oblivion. Close enough to the truth, I suppose, to make it sting. Months passed in a blur of medication, reruns on the TV, and carefully measured bottles of wine to stave off the tremors. My parents tiptoed around me, afraid to say the wrong thing. Once, my dad tried. "Sarah, maybe you could see someone, talk." His voice trailed off, defeated. There was no talking my way out of this hole, we both knew it. Besides, what was there to say? My story was as old as time. Woman makes stupid choices, ruins life, so, you're not gonna believe this. I got caught up in some internet flirting, thinking it was all just a game. Next thing I know, it spiraled out of control, dragging me into a mess of blackmail and secrets. And the craziest part? My hubby's somehow okay with it. Stick around, 'cause this story, it's a wild ride through the ups and downs of getting way too carried away online. It all started. One day, out of sheer boredom, I found myself typing away on my laptop. I was supposed to be doing research for a novel I kept telling myself I'd write one day. But let's be real, that novel wasn't going to write itself, especially not with the way I was procrastinating. Instead, I ended up on one of those chat sites, just messing around. I told myself it was harmless fun, a way for a stay-at-home mom to have a little excitement in her day. Days turned into weeks without me even noticing. That's when Alex came into the picture. He was just another bored soul on the internet, but his playful banter was different. It was like he knew exactly what to say to light up the part of me I thought had gone out for good after kids and years of marriage. At home, life went on as usual. Ben, my husband, kept working his 2 jobs, always with a smile, trying to build that perfect life we'd always talked about. But sitting across from him at dinner, I found my mind wandering. I was craving excitement, something different, something more. Then, one night, maybe the wine got to my head, or maybe I was just tired of the same old routine, I took a leap I never thought I'd take. I sent Alex a selfie. Nothing too crazy, but still, it was a line I never thought I'd cross. The rush of excitement was immediate, his compliments making my heart race in a way it hadn't in years. I was burning up with shame, sure, but also with a thrill I couldn't deny. Alex became my secret escape. Every day, his words were like a lifeline, pulling me further away from the monotony of daily life. The kids' laughter, the endless chores, the noise of the house, it all just faded into the background. I was living for those stolen moments online, caught up in a world that felt as vivid as it was forbidden. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, they did. Guilt started to eat away at me, gnawing at the edges of my happiness like a relentless pest. Every time I logged off, I'd tell myself, that's it. No more. But those promises, they piled up, ignored and forgotten, just like the stack of unopened mail gathering dust on our kitchen counter. The whispers started late at night, stolen moments when the rest of the world was asleep. Alex and we'd talk on the phone, our voices low and intimate, painting pictures so vivid, it felt like we were living in our own private movie. It was cheating in surround sound, a thrilling but dangerous game. Sarah, my best friend since forever, started picking up on the change in me. She'd look at me with those knowing eyes, asking what was up. I'd dodge her questions, brush them off with a laugh or a quick subject change. But the lies, they weighed heavy on my tongue, making each word feel like it was coated in lead. Then, out of the blue, Ben announced he'd planned a surprise weekend getaway for just the two of us. My stomach twisted into knots, not with excitement but dread. How was I supposed to explain this to Alex? My mind raced for excuses, but nothing seemed right. In the end, I settled on a work emergency. It was the best I could come up with on short notice. But Alex, he didn't buy it. The suspicion was evident in his texts, a stark contrast to his usual charm. His words, once a source of escape, now felt like a trap, closing in on me with every message. The thrill of our secret exchanges was quickly overshadowed by the mounting fear of being caught. I was stuck between two worlds, and with every passing moment, the bridge between them seemed to crumble a little more. The weekend getaway that was supposed to rekindle the spark between Ben and me turned out to be a disaster. Every gentle touch from him felt cold, distant, as if I was miles away, wrapped up in the fiery illusion of Alex's presence. It was as if Alex was there, a ghost between us, his words burning through me, leaving me more confused and divided than ever. Coming home wasn't any easier. The house felt smaller, suffocating, as if it was closing in on me, filled with the echoes of my deceit. I knew what I had to do, I had to end things with Alex. But when I finally mustered up the courage to do it, he cornered me with an ultimatum that I never saw coming. Meet me, or it's all over. The words echoed in my mind, a relentless loop that fueled my anxiety and fear. In a moment of sheer desperation, I found myself concocting a lie about needing a night out with Sarah. Ben, bless his heart, kissed me goodbye, trust shining in his eyes. It was a look that pierced through me, making the lie taste even more bitter. I felt like I was sinking further into a quagmire of my own making. The restaurant Alex chose was the epitome of intimacy, dimly lit with candles flickering on each table, casting shadows that played tricks on my eyes. When I really saw him for the first time, he wasn't at all like the man I had imagined. He was older, with a nervous glint in his eyes that immediately made my stomach churn with apprehension. This wasn't the Alex I thought I knew, the one who had seemed so charming and confident through text. Reality was now sitting across from me, and it was far from what I had fantasized. I told myself, just drinks. That's all this is. But as the night wore on, the alcohol seemed to fuel a reckless abandon I hadn't planned on. His touch, when it finally came, was clumsy, a stark contrast to the fantasy that had played out in my mind. It was a wake-up call, a cold splash of reality that made me question everything. The illusion of Alex had been a thrilling escape, but now, faced with the truth, all I felt was an overwhelming desire to flee back to the safety of my real life, no matter how mundane it seemed. The night with Alex ended in a way I could have never anticipated. I stumbled home in the early hours, my clothes clinging to the scent of cheap cologne and an overwhelming sense of self-loathing. Ben was asleep, lying with his back to me, forming a physical and emotional barrier I had never felt before. It was a silent testament to the distance I had created between us, a chasm I wasn't sure could be bridged. In a moment of desperate clarity, I deleted Alex's number from my phone. My fingers trembled as I pressed delete, but I knew deep down it wasn't enough. He knew too much, had become too entangled in the fabric of my life. The fear that he might reach out, unwilling to let go, turned my days into a blur of paranoia. Every unexpected phone call, every unknown email, sent my heart into a frenzy of fear. Then, the moment I had been dreading yet somehow knew was inevitable, arrived. Ben's voice, usually warm and gentle, was cold, distant. "We need to talk," he said, and those 4 words felt like a death knell to the life we had built together. He had found Alex's messages on an old tablet I had forgotten about. The evidence of my betrayal laid bare for him to see. The world as I knew it shattered in that instant. The ensuing conversation was a maelstrom of tears, accusations, and the raw, palpable pain in Ben's eyes. Every apology I uttered felt hollow, even to my own ears. I could see the trust we had spent years building crumble in front of me, each word I said only serving to deepen the wound. My betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a grenade that had exploded, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. The aftermath was like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My first instinct was to call Sarah, seeking the solace of her comforting voice, but what greeted me was a tone so strained and distant, it felt like a slap. Her words, usually so full of warmth and understanding, now carried a weight of judgment I couldn't bear. It was a stark reminder that my actions had consequences reaching far beyond my own immediate world. Ben, unable to face me, decided to stay with his brother. I watched him go, each step he took away from our home felt like a piece of our life together being torn away. The kids, too, looked at me with eyes full of confusion and distrust. They didn't need to know the specifics to understand that something deeply troubling was happening, their innocence caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, a letter arrived that sent chills down my spine. Alex, the man I had convinced myself was just a harmless escape, was now blackmailing me. The photos I had thoughtlessly sent, believing them to be inconsequential, were now a weapon aimed straight at my already crumbling life. The room seemed to spin around me as I read his demands. Money, a substantial amount, or Ben would receive a surprise gift that would shatter whatever fragile hope I harbored of rebuilding our life together. Swallowing my pride, I reached out to my parents. The conversation was one of the hardest I've ever had, their voices heavy with a disappointment so palpable it cut deeper than any display of anger could. Despite everything, they offered their support, a lifeline in the storm that my life had become. Panic became my constant companion, gnawing at me with relentless jaws. Alex's deadline loomed over me, a ticking time bomb threatening to destroy what little I had left. My mind raced, desperate to find a solution. Where could I get the money? How could I protect my family from the fallout of my actions? The questions circled in my head, each one a reminder of the steep price of my indiscretions. In a moment that felt both surreal and desperately sad, I found myself sorting through my jewelry box. Each piece, once a symbol of love and happier times, now felt cold and lifeless in my hands. It was a tangible measure of how far I had fallen, trading tokens of Ben's affection for a chance to bury my betrayal. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. The pawn shop was exactly as you'd expect. A place where hope comes to die, filled with the scent of desperation and broken dreams. I left with a wad of cash in my hand, the tangible proof of my sacrifice. But as I stepped back onto the street, I felt smaller, diminished. My soul, if such a thing was still mine to claim, felt tarnished, sold off piece by piece with the jewelry I no longer deserved to wear. Meeting Alex again was an ordeal I barely survived. Handing over the money, I watched his smirk spread across his face, a look of vile triumph that made my stomach churn. He assured me the photos were deleted, that I had bought my silence. As I walked away, a tiny, naive part of me dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally over. Yet, the rational part of my mind whispered a warning. This kind of poison doesn't just disappear, it lingers, tainting everything it touches. Just when I thought I was completely alone in this, Sarah reached out. Her voice was stiff, the words awkward, but beneath the discomfort, I sensed the old friend I knew. Despite everything, she offered a lifeline. To babysit the kids so Ben and I could have the conversation that loomed over us like a storm cloud. Her offer was a beacon of hope in the darkness, a reminder that even in our worst moments, the possibility of forgiveness and redemption exists. It was a small step, perhaps, but in the depths of my despair, it felt like a chance to start mending the fractures, not just in my marriage, but within myself. Facing Ben that evening was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The air between us was charged with an unspoken tension that made every moment feel like an eternity. When he finally spoke, the absence of anger in his voice was more devastating than any outburst could have been. His hurt was palpable, a visible wound that words seemed inadequate to address. Do you love him? His question cut through the silence, whispered so softly it was almost drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat. In that moment, I was torn between confessing the pathetic truth and fabricating a lie that might, by some miracle, salvage the remnants of our life together. I chose to confess, to lay bare the extent of my betrayal, though I couldn't bring myself to admit the blackmail. The omission felt like a small mercy in the face of the overwhelming shame that threatened to consume me. Ben's reaction was a mixture of pain and resignation. I need time, he said, his voice breaking the spell of our confrontation before he turned away, retreating once again to the refuge of his brother's place. The next day, when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the school called. My son had been involved in a fight, a physical altercation born from the cruel whispers and rumors that had begun to circulate. The harsh reality of my actions impacting my children hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. Picking him up from school, I saw his tear-stained face, the physical embodiment of the pain my selfishness had caused. It was a sight that pierced through me, an arrow straight to my heart. The guilt that had been my constant companion morphed into a burning rage directed not at myself, as it had been, but at Alex. He was the catalyst, the one who had exploited my vulnerability, turned my life into something unrecognizable. The drive home was silent, a quiet before the storm of reckoning I knew was coming. In the aftermath of everything, my sister became an unexpected beacon of wisdom. Her suggestion to consult a lawyer seemed so out of place in the life I thought I knew, a life that once revolved around school runs and neighborhood barbecues, not legal battles and threats. Yet, there I was, walking into a lawyer's office that felt as cold and impersonal as my current reality. The documents laid out in front of me were a blur of legal jargon. Words like separation and assets felt like physical blows, each one a stark reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. I signed where I was told, my signature shaky, betraying the turmoil inside. Fueled by a mix of fear and newfound fury, I found myself dialing Alex's number. I had nothing planned, no real threat to wield, but the anger boiling within me demanded release. When he answered, my words were a torrent, threats of police action and exposure spilling out in a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control over the chaos he'd brought into my life. His response was a cold, mocking laughter. You think you can scare me? I have nothing to lose, sweetheart. His words were like ice water, dousing the flames of my anger and leaving me with a chilling realization of the gravity of my situation. Then, as if to prove his point, new photos landed in my inbox. Not just any photos, the ones I'd prayed would never see the light of day. His threat was not an idle one. He was fully prepared to escalate things further, to drag me down into the abyss with him. The despair that followed was all-consuming, a dark cloud that threatened to suffocate the last remnants of hope I had clung to. The realization that I was entirely at his mercy was a bitter pill, one that left me questioning every choice that had led me to this point. In a heart-wrenching moment of surrender, my parents came to take the kids. The look of disappointment and shame in their eyes as they gathered their grandchildren and their belongings was a reflection of how deeply I had failed them. It was a look that said they were protecting them from me, not just from the situation. The weight of that realization nearly crushed me. That night, Sarah showed up at my door, armed with takeout and a bottle of wine, her way of braving the storm with me. We drank more than we ate, the alcohol fueling a false sense of camaraderie between us. It was a desperate attempt to find solace in each other's company, to momentarily forget the chaos my life had become. The following day, Ben came by to pick up some of his things. His movements around our home were curt, each one a deliberate attempt to minimize his presence in a space we once shared so intimately. The distance between us felt insurmountable, a chasm widened by hurt and betrayal. Words were unnecessary, the silence spoke volumes. Later, in a bid to find some semblance of hope, I turned to the internet. I searched for stories of women who had faced similar betrayals, looking for anything that might resemble a lifeline. What I found was both a source of comfort and a terrifying glimpse into what my future could hold. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone, yet it also underscored the long, arduous road ahead. Then, out of nowhere, Alex called from a blocked number. The menace in his voice was unmistakable, his words sharp and calculated. His demands had escalated, he was no longer content with just tormenting me privately. Now, he threatened to expose me to our entire community, to turn my already crumbling world into a spectacle for all to see. The call ended with his chilling laughter, leaving me frozen in fear, unsure of how to protect myself from the storm that was about to break. In a last-ditch effort to find some semblance of a strategy, I reached out to a local teacher who had gone through her own nightmare with a vengeful ex spreading her private life online. Her advice was chilling yet filled with the kind of grim determination that comes from having survived the worst. She spoke of resilience, of fighting back not just for her sake but to ensure that others could find a voice through her ordeal. Her story was a beacon in my darkness, a reminder that survival was possible, albeit with scars. Following a discussion fraught with legal jargon and the stark reality of my situation, my lawyer suggested filing for a restraining order against Alex. It felt like being handed a shield made of paper to defend against an onslaught of arrows, but it was something, an acknowledgement of the threat Alex posed and a step towards reclaiming my life. Sleep became an elusive companion. The nights stretched on endlessly, every sound magnified into a potential threat. The rustling of leaves outside my window wasn't just the wind, it was Alex, lurking in the shadows, waiting. The nightmares that once plagued my sleep now bled into my waking hours, a constant reminder of the terror that had taken root in my life. Then, an anonymous package arrived. My hands trembled as I opened it to find printouts of the most explicit messages I'd ever exchanged with Alex. Among the pages, a single word scrawled in red ink stood out: soon. The message was clear, a promise of exposure and humiliation, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Frozen in place, I couldn't force myself to move. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it Ben, standing on the other side of the door with divorce papers in hand, ready to sever the last ties that bound us together? Could it be the police, come with questions or, worse, accusations? Or was it Alex, emboldened and ready to escalate his threats into action? The weight of the unknown pressed down on me, a heavy curtain of fear and anticipation that left me paralyzed, unable to move towards the door to face whatever, or whoever. The sun was beating down on the town square, turning the local community event into a simmering cauldron of laughter, music, and the unmistakable scent of summer. I was there out of a sense of obligatory support for the community, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. That's when I met Alex, manning the beer tent with a smile that was disarmingly genuine. "Try the summer ale," he suggested, his eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "It's a game changer." His casual confidence caught me off guard, and before I knew it, we were deep in conversation about the nuances of craft beers, our shared passion. In the whirlwind of that moment, exchanging numbers seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "For event updates," he said, a statement so innocuous it bordered on transparent. Yet, there was an underlying excitement, a palpable tension that neither of us could deny. The days that followed were a blur of anticipation. I found myself reaching out to him, suggesting we catch a local band playing next week. It was casual, almost too casual, but the idea of seeing him again sent a thrill through me. The concert was crowded, the air electrified with music and the buzz of the crowd. Alex was there, his presence magnetic. As we swayed to the rhythm, his arm brushed against mine, not once but several times, sending shocks of excitement through me. It felt like a sign, a silent acknowledgement of the attraction simmering between us. Walking home under the blanket of stars, the night whispered promises, and when Alex took my hand, I didn't pull away. It felt right, inevitable even, as if all the moments leading up to this were mere formalities. Then it happened. Our first kiss, under the canopy of the night, was a fusion of passion and desperation. It was reckless, a betrayal of my vows, yet in that moment, I rationalized it as a one-time slip, a moment of weakness that would fade with the dawn. But it didn't. Instead, we found ourselves drawn into a clandestine dance of secrecy and desire. Our morning runs became our alibi, a sliver of time carved out of our everyday lives where we could pretend that the world belonged to us and us alone. The urgency of our meetings, the thrill of the forbidden, it all felt like being swept away by a summer storm, powerful and uncontrollable. Yet, even as I surrendered to the tempest of my emotions, a part of me knew that storms, no matter how exhilarating, always leave destruction in their wake. The decision to buy a second phone was one of those moments that felt like crossing an invisible line. It was a tangible admission of guilt, a physical embodiment of the lies I was weaving into the fabric of my marriage. I tucked it away in my office drawer, a secret compartment in my now double life. Mark, ever the trusting soul, noticed my absences but never questioned them beyond the surface. "Joined a new fitness group, huh? That's great, babe," he'd say, a supportive smile on his face, unaware of the betrayal lurking beneath my half-truths. The lie about the weekend work conference to sneak away to a secluded cabin with Alex was a new low for me. The thrill of the forbidden rendezvous was shadowed by the weight of my deceit. Our recklessness caught up with us at a local cafe, where a neighbor's puzzled glance lingered a moment too long. I could almost hear the cogs turning in her head, but she said nothing. Misunderstanding or not, her silence was a temporary reprieve in a web of lies that was becoming increasingly complex. Then came the day I left the second phone at home. A cold wave of panic washed over me at the realization. But Mark, in his unassuming trust, didn't find it. The relief was palpable, yet the guilt was a relentless shadow. Alex's gift of a necklace was a forbidden token, a secret I wore close to my skin, hidden from the world. It was beautiful, yet it felt like a shackle, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed. Using work as an excuse to meet Alex became a regular part of my routine. Got to leave early today, or I'll be home late, don't wait up, became my mantras. Each lie, each excuse, twisted the knife deeper into the heart of my marriage. With every secret meeting, every lie, and every moment of stolen passion, I was drifting further away from the woman I once was. The urgency of my actions, driven by a desire that blinded me to the consequences, was a force I neither understood nor could control. The complexity of my emotions was a tangled mess, a knot that tightened with every passing day, pulling me deeper into a situation from which there seemed to be no escape. I never thought a day off work could spiral into a full-blown crisis. That morning, as I told Mark one was heading into the office, the lie tasted more bitter than usual. In reality, I was stealing away for yet another secret rendezvous with Alex. The thrill had become a compulsion, a dangerous game I couldn't stop playing. The shock came in the form of a text from Mark, midday, saying he dropped by my office with lunch, only to find out I wasn't there. My heart plummeted. How could I have been so careless? Scrambling for damage control, I crafted a lie about needing a personal day for some self-care, even going as far as sending him a Photoshop spa receipt. The deception was becoming second nature, a reflex I hated myself for. Mark's response was calm, too calm. Hope you feel rejuvenated, he texted back, but the subtext was clear, his trust was fraying. He began to watch me more closely, an undercurrent of suspicion in his once easygoing demeanor. I could see the questions in his eyes, questions he never voiced. The affair with Alex, once a blazing inferno, had started to dim. The lies, the sneaking around, it was exhausting. Yet, the thought of cutting ties with him filled me with an inexplicable dread. In a moment of misguided desperation, we planned one last trip together, a grand finale at a beach resort, a final goodbye to the chaos we had created. The universe, it seemed, had its own plans. At the airport, unbeknownst to us, a colleague of Mark spotted us. Instead of confronting us, he chose to silently document our betrayal with a quick snap of his camera. The photo, a ticking time bomb, was a piece of irrefutable evidence I didn't know existed. That trip was the pinnacle of our affair, a mixture of passion and guilt so potent it was intoxicating. Each stolen moment was laced with the sharp tang of reality, the knowledge that this was the end. The beautiful lie we had woven was unraveling fast, and the impending fallout was a shadow looming over every touch, every whispered promise. Returning home was like stepping into a parallel universe where everything looked the same but felt irrevocably changed. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, a burden I no longer knew how to bear. The conflict within me reached its peak, a storm of emotions that threatened to consume everything in its path. The moment I stepped back into our home, the resolve to mend my fractured marriage enveloped me like a thick fog. I was determined to cut Alex out completely, to somehow glue back the pieces of the life I'd so carelessly shattered. The decision was clear, necessary, and filled with a silent agony that seemed to pulse through the very walls of the house. But the universe had a cruel twist in store. In a moment of faith that felt both inevitable and horrifying, Mark found the second phone. It was an accident, a mundane search for misplaced paperwork that unearthed my darkest secret. The phone, hidden away in the depths of my office drawer, buzzed with a message from Alex, a message I never saw, but Mark did. The confrontation was inevitable. Mark, holding the phone with a steady hand, his voice eerily calm, asked for an explanation. The room spun as I confessed, the words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and desperation. I pleaded for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right, but the hurt in Mark's eyes was a chasm too vast to bridge. He left that night, the sound of the door closing behind him marking the end of us. The silence that followed was deafening, a void where our life together used to be. I tried to reach him, to somehow communicate the depth of my remorse, but he was unreachable, wrapped in his own process of grief and betrayal. The final nail in the coffin was a photograph, evidence of the lie I had lived, sent to Mark by a colleague. It was irrefutable proof of my deceit, a visual testament to the pain I had caused. The sight of it, he later confessed, extinguished any lingering hope of reconciliation. The arrival of the divorce papers was a formality, a cold, legal acknowledgement of what we both knew to be true. Mark's decision was final, the realization that I had irrevocably destroyed the foundation of our marriage with my actions, actions I could never take back, was a weight I knew I'd carry forever. In the aftermath, my attempts to reach out were met with silence. Mark had made his choice, and it was one that excluded me entirely. The man I had married, the life we had built together, was now a chapter closed so firmly, no amount of regret could pry it open again. The sale of our house felt like erasing the last tangible piece of us, a final severing of what Mark and I once shared. I moved into a small apartment, its starkness a daily reminder of the vast emptiness that had become my life. The walls, devoid of memories, echoed with the silence of my solitude. Mark, seeking a fresh start, changed his job. It was a move to cleanse his life of the remnants of our shared past, a step towards healing that I couldn't fault him for, yet it stung with the bitter tang of finality. Every attempt I made to bridge the chasm between us was met with a resolute wall of determination. Mark was moving on, his path diverging so completely from mine that it was as if we were strangers. In the midst of my attempts to rebuild some semblance of a life, Alex reappeared, as if summoned by my lowest point. He reached out, hoping to rekindle what we had, but the sight of his name ignited a visceral repulsion. I rejected him with a finality that mirrored Mark's rejection of me. The affair had lost all its illusory glamour, leaving behind only the stark reality of its consequences. The day I saw Mark with someone new, laughter lighting up his face in a way I hadn't seen in years, my heart fractured anew. It was a visual confirmation of my irrelevance in his life, a poignant illustration of what I had lost. Mark's happiness, so evident and so apart from anything to do with me, underscored the gravity of my mistakes. As Mark's new relationship blossomed, the contrast with our failed marriage was stark. Where we had been strained and secretive, they were open and joyful. The realization that I was the architect of my own misery was a pill too bitter to swallow. Loneliness became my constant companion, my social circle having closed ranks around Mark. The isolation was suffocating, each day a struggle to find a reason to keep moving forward. Therapy became my lifeline, a place to untangle the web of my actions and their far-reaching consequences. It was there, in the quiet contemplation of my choices, that I began to confront the reality of the damage I had caused. The journey was painful, a slow peeling back of the layers of denial and rationalization, but it was necessary. In the sterile environment of my therapist's office, I started to understand the depth of my betrayal and the path to redemption, however long and arduous it might be. The road ahead was unclear, filled with the uncertainty of a future I had never envisioned for myself. A future where I had to learn to forgive myself, even if forgiveness from those I had hurt seemed an impossibility. The morning I landed the new job felt like the first breath of fresh air in a suffocating room. It wasn't just a job, it was a beacon of hope, a tangible step towards rebuilding the ruins of my life. The company was small, the role a step down from what I was used to, but it mattered little. It was my declaration to the world, and more importantly, to myself, that I was ready to start anew. Volunteering became another cornerstone of my redemption. I poured myself into community service, seeking solace in the act of giving back. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a step towards atonement, a way to balance the scales of my conscience. When I learned of Mark's engagement through the distant window of social media, the news hit me like a physical blow. There they were, smiling and radiant, a stark reminder of the life I had forfeited. The sting of exclusion was sharp, yet it served as a painful acknowledgement of the consequences of my actions. The divorce had left me navigating a minefield of financial challenges. Legal fees and settlements had drained my savings, a stark reminder of the cost of betrayal. It was during this tumultuous time that I made the decision to sell the necklace Alex had given me. Letting it go felt like severing the last physical tie to the affair, a symbolic release of the past. Seeing Alex with another woman brought a complex swirl of emotions. There was relief, certainly, that he had moved on, but also an undercurrent of sadness for what could have been, had our choices been different. It was a closure of sorts, a final confirmation that the chapter of us was well and truly over. Reconnecting with old friends was a humbling experience. Many were hesitant, their loyalty to Mark a barrier I had to navigate with care and understanding. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild those bridges, each rekindled friendship a precious lifeline pulling me back from the brink of isolation. Mark's marriage was a day of quiet reflection for me. The absence of an invitation was expected, yet it underscored the finality of our division. It was a poignant reminder that life marches relentlessly forward, with or without our consent. Each of these steps, these actions and reactions, were threads in the tapestry of my new life. A life marked not by the absence of mistakes, but by the willingness to learn from them, to grow beyond them. The journey was fraught with reminders of what I had lost, but also filled with small, significant victories in my quest for self-forgiveness and redemption. From the moment I brought Luna home, a scrappy little shelter dog with eyes too big for her face, I knew I had found a kind of salvation. She demanded nothing from me but love and care, offering in return a companionship that was simple and pure. It was a bond untainted by the complexities of human relationships, a reminder of the joy in simple connections. In the quiet moments, with Luna curled up beside me, I began to write. My words spilled onto the page, raw and unfiltered, a narrative of my journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and the painstaking road to redemption. Writing became my therapy, a way to untangle the knots of my past and lay bare the lessons learned. It was a cautionary tale, not just for others but for myself, a reminder of the consequences of choices made in the heat of passion. The realization hit me gradually, like the slow rise of the sun after the darkest night. My journey of self-discovery and acceptance was far from over, it was merely a new chapter in a life that was still unfolding. The path ahead was uncharted, filled with uncertainties, but also possibilities. Returning to volunteer at the community event where my life had taken such a pivotal turn felt like coming full circle. The irony wasn't lost on me. This time, however, I was there not as a woman on the brink of making life-altering mistakes, but as one who had faced her demons and was slowly finding her way back to the light. It was there, amidst the laughter and chatter of familiar faces, that I met Sam. He was volunteering at the booth next to mine, his easy smile and genuine interest in those around him a balm to my battered heart. Our conversations were tentative at first, a dance of two souls each carrying their own scars. But there was a connection, undeniable and growing stronger with each passing moment. Reflecting on my past, I understood now more than ever the value of truth and the deep, lasting pain of betrayal. The mistakes I had made were indelible parts of my history, but they did not define me. I was determined not to repeat them, to build a future on the foundation of honesty, trust, and respect. Opening up to the possibility of love again was terrifying, yet exhilarating. With Sam, I felt the stirrings of hope, a gentle promise that maybe, just maybe, happiness wasn't as elusive as I had once believed. It was a chance to prove to myself that I had grown, that I was not the same person who had so carelessly gambled away her marriage for a fleeting passion. My story, marked by the highs of newfound love and the lows of devastating loss, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It was a journey not just of seeking forgiveness from others, but of learning to forgive myself. In the end, I realized that the road to redemption was paved with lessons learned from past mistakes, and the strength to move forward, always forward, towards a future filled with hope and the promise of